Libraries are meant to be quiet, safe places, but sometimes the silence hides something much darker. The stillness between the shelves, the dim corners untouched by light, the faint creak of wooden floors. These ordinary details take on an entirely different meaning when something unexplainable stirs within them. A place designed for knowledge and comfort becomes, in these moments, a stage for fear. What makes library horror so disturbing is not just the events themselves, but the contrast. A library should be safe, familiar, and calm. We enter expecting order, yet the stories you're about to hear reveal chaos lurking just beneath that calm surface. Each one is rooted in truth, recorded through testimony, investigation, and memory, not invented legends. And perhaps that is what unsettles us most. The fact that these accounts remain unexplained, their answers missing among the very shelves meant to preserve history. Tonight, you'll hear of vanishings without a trace, voices that echo where no one stands, archives with secrets too heavy to stay buried, and even objects that seem to carry a life of their own. Some are whispered about only in hushed tones by those who worked within the buildings, others documented yet never solved. All of them leave behind the same chilling reminder: silence is never empty. So, settle in as we turn the page to the first account, one that still lingers in the memories of those who knew her. A story librarians themselves continue to whisper when the halls grow too quiet. Let's begin with the first story, one that librarians still whisper about to this day. It began on what seemed like an ordinary evening. The town library had closed at its usual hour, the last patrons drifting away into the fading light of dusk. Inside, the head librarian, a woman respected for her decades of service, carried out her nightly routine. She straightened the magazines, logged the final checkouts, and walked the aisles with the care of someone who knew each shelf by heart. Colleagues described her as reliable to the point of habit, always leaving at the same time, always driving home along the same route, always arriving promptly the next morning. But on this night, she never came home. When she did not appear the following day, worry spread quickly. Her car was still parked neatly in the lot, keys missing but purse locked safely inside. The library lights burned brightly as though frozen mid-shift, and on her desk lay a stack of books she had been sorting, open and waiting for attention. The most unsettling detail came from the staff member who opened that morning. The chair behind the desk was still warm. Police were called immediately, and for a brief moment, the community expected answers. After all, disappearances leave trails, witnesses, evidence, footprints in the dust. Yet none appeared. No one had seen her leave. Cameras outside captured nothing unusual. Inside, however, the library's limited security system revealed something baffling. At precisely 9:47 p.m. after closing, faint movement was recorded among the shelves. Books shifted, one tumbling silently to the floor. Then came the audio, a whisper so low it was almost dismissed as static, a single word stretched and unclear. Investigators scoured the building. Dust was checked for prints, exits secured, every corner of the old structure explored. The only trace was a single row of books that appeared misaligned, as though someone had brushed past in a hurry or been pulled away. The librarian's jacket was found draped across a chair, but her shoes were missing, as if she had walked out barefoot into the night. But where? Rumors began to spread among the staff. One young librarian admitted that in the weeks before the disappearance, she had overheard her mentor speaking quietly to herself while shelving late at night. She described it not as muttering, but as though answering someone else. Another claimed to have seen her pause in the archives, listening intently to something only she could hear. At the time, no one thought much of it. Now those details haunted every retelling. Police leaned on familiar explanations: abduction, voluntary disappearance, mental distress, but none fit. There was no forced entry, no ransom note, no suspicious activity on her bank accounts or phone. Friends insisted she was content with her life, proud of her career, and firmly rooted in the community. If she had left, it was not by choice. What disturbed investigators most was the final frame of security footage. Just seconds before the system cut off for the night, a figure seemed to flicker at the end of an aisle. It was indistinct, more a shadow than a shape, but the height matched hers. She appeared to step sideways as though drawn into the shelves themselves. When the frame refreshed, she was gone. For years, the library remained a place of quiet dread. Patrons claimed to feel a sudden chill near the section where she had last been seen. Some avoided that aisle entirely, whispering that the air there seemed heavier, as if reluctant to let them pass. One visitor described picking up a book only to feel a faint brush against her arm, though no one stood nearby. The shelves themselves seemed to resist order. Books placed carefully one evening would be discovered leaning at odd angles by morning. Staff began to report the same whisper that once echoed through the security audio. Not loud enough to identify, never more than a single drawn-out syllable, but always close, too close. Years have passed, and the disappearance remains unsolved. The case file sits as cold as the aisle where she was last seen. For her family, there is no closure, only the absence of explanation. For those who still work within those walls, there is unease that lingers long after closing, when the lights dim and the silence deepens. Some say she left that night, taken by human hands. Others insist she never left at all. To this day, the shelves where she vanished are said to be unnaturally cold, as though the space itself remembers what happened there. The historic library had stood for more than a century, its stone walls weathered by time, its high windows casting long shadows even in daylight. At night, however, the building seemed to breathe differently. The silence was thicker, the air colder, and every creak of the old floors carried as if the structure itself were alive. For the night guard assigned to patrol its aisles, the job was meant to be simple: check the doors, log the hours, and wait until morning. But at 3 a.m. the building had other plans. It began with footsteps. At first, the guard believed another staff member had remained behind, perhaps a student finishing a late project. The steps were measured, deliberate, echoing down the long marble corridor that led to the fiction wing. He called out, his voice swallowed by the cavernous space, but there was no answer. Following the sound, he found only empty aisles. Books lined neatly, air heavy with dust, but no person in sight. Night after night, the routine repeated. At 3 a.m., without fail, the sound of footsteps returned. Sometimes they lingered just out of reach, other times they seemed to follow directly behind him. He began to notice other anomalies, lights flickering without cause, motion sensors triggered in locked rooms, the faint sound of pages turning when the reading rooms were empty. He filed reports, each one met with skeptical smiles. Police dismissed his claims, citing exhaustion or imagination fueled by long shifts in solitude. Yet the guard insisted he was not alone. His account gained weight when a colleague reluctantly admitted to hearing whispers near the archives one night. Whispers that ceased the moment a flashlight beam cut through the dark. The breaking point came when he saw it. During one of his rounds, moving between towering shelves, a figure appeared at the far end of the aisle. It was tall, shadowy, and indistinct, like a silhouette carved from the dark itself. The figure did not advance, but it did not retreat either. Instead, it drifted slowly along the aisle, vanishing the moment he approached. His blood ran cold, yet his training demanded he be checked again. He found only silence, though the books on the nearest shelf leaned awkwardly, as if recently disturbed. Determined to prove he was not losing his mind, the guard requested the security footage. What he found was more disturbing than confirmation. At the exact time of his sighting, the cameras captured movement within the library. Books slid from shelves with no visible cause, drifting as though nudged by invisible hands. One even toppled violently, hitting the floor with enough force to echo through the microphone. Yet frame after frame revealed no person in the aisle. No guard, no intruder, only the books themselves in motion. When he presented the footage, supervisors remained hesitant. Some dismissed it as tampering or technical glitches. The police shrugged, unwilling to open an investigation into phantoms, but the guard stood by his story. And when asked why he still worked there, he answered only that leaving would feel like surrendering the building to something he did not understand. Over time, others began to speak. A janitor recalled strange shadows darting across the mezzanine when he cleaned late. A librarian admitted that one morning she found a stack of books arranged into a perfect circle on the floor, despite the library being locked overnight. Visitors complained of cold spots near the history section, where even summer air failed to warm the skin. The midnight visitor became more than a rumor. It became part of the library's identity, a shadow that drifted silently at 3 a.m., defying cameras, police reports, and every rational explanation. For some, it was a haunting. For others, a presence with a purpose still unknown. But for those who walked the aisles in the dead of night, it was undeniably real. Security footage showed the books moving, but no one was there to touch them. Locked door, a dusty hallway that leads to forgotten records, an archive where fragile documents wait in silence. In the case of this historic library, that place was the basement. Few staff ever went down there willingly, and fewer still spoke of what they found when they did. The basement had originally been designed as storage, a simple extension beneath the main structure. But its history stretched back farther, into a time when the town itself was still scarred by war. Old records revealed that during the darkest years, when hospitals overflowed, the basement had been repurposed as a temporary morgue. For months, rows of bodies had been stored there, stacked in the cool stone room beneath the library's foundation. After the war ended, the basement was scrubbed, sealed, and eventually converted to hold archives. Yet the weight of what it once carried seemed to linger. Staff who entered the basement described the same first impression, a coldness that clung to the skin. Even in summer, when the building above baked in the sun, the basement was unwelcoming, its air thick and unmoving. One librarian admitted that the moment the door closed behind her, she felt as though she had descended into another place entirely. It was not silence that filled the room, but a faint hum, like voices too distant to understand. The stories escalated. A young assistant tasked with retrieving documents claimed she heard whispers that grew louder the deeper she walked. At first they were indistinct, like the rustle of pages. But as she reached the far shelves, the sound sharpened, rising into words she almost recognized. She bolted before finding out what they said. Another employee fainted during a routine errand, collapsing among the dusty boxes. When she was carried upstairs, pale and trembling, she whispered through cracked lips. Something touched my shoulder. None of the reports could be proven, yet they repeated with disturbing consistency. Temperature logs showed no reason for the sudden drops in warmth. Cameras installed briefly to reassure staff captured only static and occasional glitches. One clip showed a shadow sweeping across the wall, though no one else was present. The basement's history only deepened suspicion. Records revealed not only its wartime use, but also rumors that the library's founder had conducted private seances in the same room decades later. Whether out of grief for those lost or a fascination with the occult, no one could say. What remained was the memory of candles burned low, circles drawn on the floor, and journals filled with invocations now locked in restricted collections. For those who had no choice but to enter, the experience left marks. Some emerged with headaches, others with vivid dreams that followed for weeks. Dreams of standing in long corridors of stone, listening to whispers that seemed to beckon. A few swore they returned to find books misplaced in their carts, as though unseen hands had meddled with their tasks. Eventually, the head librarian made the decision to restrict access. The basement was locked, archives relocated where possible, and staff instructed to avoid entering unless absolutely necessary. Still, the presence remained. During quiet evenings, employees claimed to hear faint whispers rising through the vents, drifting upward into the reading rooms. The voices were never clear, but always persistent, like a conversation happening just beyond comprehension. Police and city officials dismissed the claims as superstition. They pointed to the building's age, the natural creaks of stone and wood, and the suggestibility of workers already aware of the basement's past. Yet no rational explanation erased the fear that hung in the air each time the subject arose. The library continued to operate as usual, its visitors largely unaware of what lay beneath their feet. Children read books upstairs, students studied in silence, and locals browsed the shelves, never knowing that just below them rested a chamber that once held death, and perhaps still did in ways unseen. To this day, the basement remains locked. Its door is seldom opened, and when it is, the brave claim the air still rushes out in a chilling wave, as though something inside resents the intrusion. And some whisper that, on the quietest nights, the vents breathe faint voices into the upper floors, reminders of a past that refuses to stay buried. Every library has its oddities, misplaced items, books returned with coffee stains, pages marked by careless notes. But this library held one book that was different, a volume whose reputation grew darker with every person who borrowed it. On the surface, it seemed ordinary enough, a worn hardback with no unusual markings aside from its faded spine and the faint scent of old paper. Yet those who took it home rarely kept it long, and when they returned, they did so shaken. The first borrower was a college student, eager to dive into its subject matter. Within a week, he came back pale, returning the book several days late. He explained, hesitantly, that he had been plagued by vivid nightmares since the night he opened it. Dreams of standing in endless corridors of shelves that stretched into darkness, voices whispering from just beyond reach. He would wake drenched in sweat, convinced that someone was watching him. Another borrower, a middle-aged woman, described waking to faint scratches across her arms. At first, she thought her cat was the culprit, until she realized the marks appeared even when the animal was locked outside her room. Each morning brought fresh lines, thin and shallow, as though something had been reaching for her in her sleep. She, too, returned the book late, trembling as she slid it across the counter. The most disturbing account came from a man who admitted he heard voices whenever the book was in his home. Not the indistinct hum of imagination, but clear whispers that seemed to call his name. The voices would rise at night, echoing from the corners of his room. He swore he saw the book shift slightly on his desk, as if moved by invisible hands. Sleep became impossible, and within days he begged the library to take it back. Patterns emerged. Each time the book was checked out, it was returned late, as if its hold resisted timely return. The borrowers never kept it longer than necessary, and yet always seemed reluctant to touch it again, handling it with gloves or pushing it away as though contact alone carried weight. The staff grew uneasy. Some joked it was cursed, but the laughter never reached their eyes. Psychologists consulted on the matter pointed to the power of suggestion. Perhaps the first borrower's story had seeded an idea, and every reader afterward subconsciously amplified it. A single, unsettling dream could spiral into obsession, scratches explained by restless sleep, whispers imagined by tired minds. Fear, after all, has a way of feeding itself. Yet others were not convinced. The book itself was inspected, pages intact, no ink smeared with strange substances, no markings hidden in margins. But one oddity remained. Despite being catalogued like every other volume, its publishing history could not be traced. No records of the author, no publisher details beyond a vague imprint, and no other known copies in circulation. It was as though the book had appeared on the shelves without origin. Whispers spread among the staff. Some avoided touching it altogether, sliding it back onto the shelf with the edge of a folder rather than their bare hands. Others claimed the air grew colder when they stood too close, a draft that should not have existed in the climate-controlled room. One librarian admitted she woke one night to find the book resting on her kitchen table, though she had never borrowed it. Eventually, the decision was made to remove the book from circulation. It was placed inside a locked glass case in the restricted section, where only staff could access it. Since then, no new nightmares have been reported, and no voices have followed anyone home. Still, few are willing to linger near the case for long. Patrons sometimes notice it while wandering past, asking casually about the locked display. The staff always answer the same way: it's not available for borrowing. Whether the terror it inspired was psychological suggestion or something darker remains a question unanswered. Perhaps fear alone fueled the nightmares, or perhaps the book carried with it a presence beyond explanation. Whatever the truth, its reputation has never faded. The book now sits locked in a restricted case, unopened for years. Small-town libraries are usually thought of as safe havens, quiet places where the most dramatic sounds are the rustle of pages or the clatter of dropped books. Yet, in one community, that calm reputation was shattered by something no one could explain. It began on an ordinary evening when a handful of patrons were finishing their reading on the main floor. As the clock edged toward closing time, a sound erupted from the second floor, a scream so piercing and raw that it froze everyone where they stood. Witnesses described it as blood-curdling, filled with a terror that no human voice should have carried. It rose, echoed through the rafters, and then cut off abruptly, leaving only silence in its wake. Staff rushed upstairs, certain someone had been attacked. Yet the rooms were empty. The aisles neat, chairs tucked in, not a single sign of disturbance. Police arrived minutes later, combing the upper floor with flashlights, checking every corner. Even searching the locked supply rooms. Nothing. No intruder. No distressed patron. Not even an open window that could have explained the sound. Still, everyone downstairs swore to what they had heard. The incident might have been dismissed as mass hysteria if it had ended there, but weeks later it happened again. This time, a larger crowd heard it, students studying late, a librarian logging returns, and a custodian cleaning the lobby. Each described the same horrifying detail. The screams seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the walls themselves were howling. The sound was sharp, prolonged, and unmistakably filled with anguish. Again, the upstairs floor was empty, reports piled up. Some patrons refused to visit after dark, whispering about the screaming library. Staff grew uneasy, exchanging nervous glances whenever night fell. Police opened a brief investigation but found no evidence. Their official explanation suggested building acoustics, perhaps pipes groaning, or wind funneling through the structure. Yet no one who heard the sound believed it. As one witness said, "I've heard pipes." Pipes don't sound like someone begging for their life. One of the most chilling accounts came from two separate patrons on different nights. Both claimed that immediately before the scream, they felt the air pressure shift, as if the building inhaled. A heavy silence fell, and then the cry burst forth with terrifying force. Neither patron stayed to see what followed. Both ran, leaving their books behind. Over time, the phenomenon developed a pattern. It never occurred during the day, only late at night, always from the second floor. No recording devices ever captured it clearly. Audio equipment set up by curious staff picked up distortions, static, and once, what sounded like a faint wail buried in the noise. But the scream itself seemed to resist capture, as if the building chose when and to whom it revealed itself. Theories abounded. Some tied the event to a tragic accident decades earlier when a fire swept through the town and left several victims trapped in nearby buildings. Others suggested a former librarian had taken her life inside, though no record confirmed the rumor. Skeptics insisted it was all imagination, amplified by the eerie quiet of libraries at night. Yet, the sheer number of witnesses made disbelief difficult. Those who heard the scream never forgot it. They described it as inhumanly loud, filled with pain that clawed at their nerves. Some said it was a woman, others a child, and a few admitted it sounded like neither. What unsettled them most was not just the sound itself, but the way it ended with a sudden, unnatural silence, as if something had cut the voice off mid-breath. Even now, the library staff speak of the second floor with unease. At closing time, few linger upstairs. The lights are switched off quickly, the door locked without delay. Patrons sometimes ask about the legend, their voices playful, but the answers they receive are never in jest. One staff member put it simply, "It doesn't matter what it was, I just know it wasn't human." Libraries are unlike any other public space. They are built for silence, for the absence of noise, and in that stillness the human mind becomes more alert to what it cannot explain. A creak that would go unnoticed in a busy street feels amplified between tall shelves. A flicker of light becomes a signal rather than a coincidence. Our imagination fills the gaps, but silence often turns imagination into conviction. History adds another layer. Many libraries are not simply new buildings filled with books. They are repositories built upon decades, sometimes centuries, of human presence. The walls have absorbed countless lives, students who spent nights alone in study, workers who closed in the dark, architects who designed spaces that unintentionally echo like chambers. When something unsettling happens, that history colors our interpretation, making a strange sound feel like a voice or a cold draft feel like a presence. Psychologists argue that stories thrive because humans seek patterns, and when many people share an eerie experience, the tale gains power. Yet even this explanation cannot smooth over certain edges. The librarian who vanished left her car behind. Security footage showed books moving without a hand to touch them. Multiple witnesses described screams too vivid to dismiss as plumbing or wind, so while psychology and history may shape the stage, not every detail fits neatly into reason. Some questions remain open, lingering, refusing to close. 5 stories, each bound by the same thread. Silence that hides more than it reveals. A librarian vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only cold shelves and unanswered questions. A guard watches as shadows move through the aisles at 3 a.m., the cameras capturing books shifting with no hand to touch them. A basement, once used as a morgue, breathes whispers through its vents, long after being sealed. A single book carries nightmares and voices into the homes of anyone who dares to borrow it. And a library screams a sound so piercing that dozens swear they heard it, yet no explanation has ever been found. Each account could be explained away, at least on the surface. Fatigue, suggestion, the tricks of old buildings and tired minds. Rational theories are comforting, but they falter when the details pile up. Too many witnesses, too many consistencies, too much unease that lingers long after the doors are locked. That is the unsettling paradox of libraries. They are designed for order, for learning, for calm. Yet it is within that very calm that the disturbing feels most intrusive. Ordinary places should not hold extraordinary terror, and when they do, the contrast leaves scars. Perhaps these stories are fragments of human imagination woven into myth, or perhaps the silence of libraries is never truly empty, but instead a veil, thin, fragile, and hiding things we are not meant to see. Next time you walk into a library, notice the silence, because silence is never empty. It is filled with echoes of footsteps that once passed through, with whispers too faint to catch, with the weight of countless lives who moved between those shelves before you. We convince ourselves it is peaceful, that the quiet is safe. Yet the stories you've just heard remind us that silence can also conceal a librarian who never returned home, a shadow that drifted through aisles no human walked, whispers rising from a basement that once held the dead, a book that carried its presence into the dreams of readers, and a scream that tore through the night, leaving terror in its wake. Each tale may fade with time, but the unease they create does not. It lingers the way dust settles on books no one touches, waiting for someone to disturb it again. Perhaps you'll never experience anything like this. Perhaps your own visits to libraries will remain calm, filled only with the comfort of reading. But even then, you might pause for a moment longer than usual when the lights flicker. You might listen a little closer when the building creaks. And you might wonder, if only for an instant, what else might be sharing that silence with you. So as the night deepens and the stories fade into quiet, let one question remain with you. Which story unsettled you most? Stories like these remind us of something curious about human nature. We are drawn to the unsettling. Even when a tale leaves us uneasy, we lean in closer. Perhaps it's because horror, told safely from a distance, lets us explore fear without being consumed by it. The library becomes a stage, not just for knowledge and learning, but for imagination, anxiety, and wonder. In that way, even the darkest accounts carry their own form of comfort. Many who listen to stories like these do so late at night, not to spark panic, but to drift into a state between awareness and rest. The cadence of narration, the slow unveiling of mystery, the balance between tension and quiet, all of it creates an atmosphere where the mind can wander. Fear sharpens our senses, but the calm rhythm of storytelling soothes them again, leaving us balanced between unease and relaxation. It's a strange paradox. We seek out what unsettles us to find peace, and maybe that's why stories of haunted libraries, cursed books, and unexplained screams have lasted as long as they have. They don't just frighten us, they remind us that the world is still filled with questions we can't answer, and mysteries we have yet to solve. If these stories have kept you company tonight, there are countless more waiting in the shadows. More accounts, more whispers, more places where silence carries weight. So whether you listen for curiosity, fascination, or even to help you fall asleep, know this: there will always be another mystery to uncover. Until next time, keep your light close, your mind open, and your heart steady. The stories aren't finished yet.